Afternoon, everyone. We'll just wait another minute for a couple more people to join, and then we will start. So good morning, afternoon, or evening to you, depending on where you are joining us from. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces, and thank you for being part of our continued journey during Lent. For our new pilgrims, you are most welcome, and we are very grateful that you're joining us as well. So let me start by saying a blessed Palm Sunday to all. May this be a wonderful start to the beginning of the Holy Week for you and your families. As you know, this is a joint program with our friends from Tentua in Jerusalem. Father John Paul and Deacon Frederick are joining us today in a very special way, in that they are right now participating in the joyous procession, walking down Mount Olives and replicating the 2.5 kilometer journey that Jesus walked on Palm Sunday. Only on Friday did Father John Paul and Deacon Frederick hear that Palm Sunday procession was going ahead, and as expected, with numerous COVID restrictions. So they are right now carrying each one of us in prayer down Mount Olives, which is the topic of our session today with Hannah. So it gives me great joy to introduce Hannah Benkovsky to you, who will be doing a virtual tour of Mount Olives for us today. Many of you will remember Hannah, who toured and shared her rich and wonderful knowledge of Jerusalem, and in particular the Holy Sepulchre, with us last year during our Advent retreat. For those of you who don't know her yet, Hannah is an Israeli Jew from Jerusalem with a master's degree in comparative religion from the Hebrew University. Hannah is the program director of the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations and has more than 20 years of practical experience in interfaith activities in Israel and abroad. Hannah's expertise is the Christian communities in Israel and Jewish-Christian relations in the Israeli context. Hannah has also worked as a freelance tour educator in Jerusalem for a varied group, which includes study tours in the Christian quarters for mainly the Israeli Jews. So welcome, Hannah. We are very excited to hear from you about this wonderful celebration today of Palm Sunday and the Mount of Olives. And just before I hand over to Hannah, I just want to say, if you have got questions for her, please put them in the chat window, and I will try to raise them at the appropriate times during the talk. So with that, over to you, Hannah.
Good morning and good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Greetings from Jerusalem. It's the afternoon here, and while we're talking, people are walking in the procession that just left Bet Faj a few minutes ago. You can follow all the services of today, of the Holy Week, through the web, through the Facebook of the Custodia Terra Santa, or the Christian Media Center. So that's what I do if I don't go and visit the sites. And I feel honored to share with you some of my knowledge and experience of Jerusalem during Palm Sunday and during Holy Week. And we're going to have kind of a virtual tour that will give you some impression, like if you were walking in Jerusalem during Palm Sunday. So I will share the screen, and I will stop once in a while in the middle for questions. In just a second. Okay. So, so it's going to be a virtual tour on Mount of Olives. As Berta has mentioned, I'm working for the Jerusalem Center for Jewish-Christian Relations, and it's part of the Rossing Center for Education and Dialogue. And if you want to see what we're doing and follow our work, you're welcome to check the website. And we're moving on toward Mount of Olives. So obviously Mount of Olives is connected to the fact that there are many olive trees on the mountain. You can find some young olive trees, but you can also find very old olive trees. Some of them are dated to the beginning of the 12th century, so very old trees. Mount of Olives is not a mountain, but it has few peaks, so it's more a ridge. It's quite a long ridge surrounding the city from the east, and it has 3 peaks that you can see its towers from every observation point in the city. The first one is Hebrew University, the campus of Mount Scopus. It's the northern part of the ridge of Mount of Olives. The second tower you will see from everywhere is the Augusta Victoria compound. It's a church and a hospital run by the Lutheran Church, part of it by the Lutheran World Federation and another part by the German Church. And the third tower you will see from every viewpoint is the Russian Convent of the Ascension, just next to the Church of the Ascension. But what I like about Mount of Olives, it's actually a ridge between the desert, and this is the Judean desert, which is a small desert. It's a desert that's created by the height of the mountain. Because of the height of Mount of Olives, there's very little rain beyond that, east of that, and therefore this Judean desert was created. It's a small desert. It's very close to the city, but it's still a desert. And in the desert, you always have feeling that you can experience God in a better way. And if you look in the Bible, you can see that the Israelites had to go through the desert in order to turn from a group of families to people. In the desert, you need God, because in the desert you don't have water. In the desert you don't have food. You need to pray to God in order to get these very basic things that you will have in the city. Monks were going into the desert, going to the wilderness in order to have close relation, to feel God closer. On the other hand, on the other side of Mount of Olives, you have the city. And the city, and I put a lot of photos of the city so you will get the hustle and bustle atmosphere of the city. If it's the old city or the new city, you have people, you have markets, you have money, you have passions, you have corruption. There's a lot going on in the city, and it's really easy to forget God when you are in the city. And Mount of Olives is something in between, and I always like to present it as a liminal space between the desert where you feel God, when you feel the presence of God, when you need God, and the city where you feel that you don't need anyone, but you have everything you need there. And it's something in between this desert and the city, this hustle and bustle atmosphere and this very quietness and emptiness of the desert. And Mount of Olives is in the middle, and it has a role as something in the middle. And I will start with a Jewish tradition, coming from a Jewish background, being Jewish. We celebrated the Passover meal, Leila Seder, yesterday. And I always start with how I connect the mountain. And in the Jewish tradition, we have a couple of rituals that were done on this mountain that I would like to mention here. The first one is not connected to Passover, but it's actually connected to the Day of Atonement, to Yom Kippur, and that's the scapegoat. So according to the book of Leviticus, during the feast of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the priest takes 2 goats and he makes a lot between them. One of them he will sacrifice on the altar in the temple, but then Aaron should bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for the sins, for a sin offering. But the goat chosen by lot as a scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to be used for making atonement by sending it into the wilderness as a scapegoat. So from the city where you have all the people with all the sins, you put all the sins on that scapegoat and you send it to the desert, but you send it through the Mount of Olives. So from the Mount of Olives, the goat would be sent to the desert, and from a specific point, some scholars suggest that that place was called Azazel. That's the word, the original word in the Hebrew for the scapegoat. He would be pushed down and probably will be killed over there. So Mount of Olives is used as a kind of a liminal space between the city, all the sins of the city, and then you send all these sins with this scapegoat to the desert. The other very interesting ritual that was done on Mount of Olives during the time of the temple is the red heifer. And in Judaism, we talk a lot about purity and impurity of the body, not just the soul, but the body. It's very important that your body will be pure before you enter the temple, before you eat from the sacrifices. But the worst impurity, the things that it's the most difficult to purify from, is the impurity of the dead body. And that's why in Judaism, we always have the cemeteries outside the city. We're going to walk on Mount of Olives and you will see a huge Jewish cemetery. I will elaborate more about it. But the reason why we have the cemetery on Mount of Olives is because it's the border of the city. Wherever you go to a Jewish city, you will see that the cemetery is outside because the dead body is the worst impurity. In order to purify the body from the impurity of the dead, you need to have a ritual that includes red heifer. And it says in the Torah that you have to take this red cow, burn it, and then throw it over the person who's being purified before he entered the ritual bath. But where do you do that? And this is very interesting because the Mishnah, the oral Jewish tradition that was written in the 2nd century and explained the Jewish law, said that the priest had to take this red heifer and he would stand on the top of Mount of Olives and direct his gaze carefully, see the opening of the sanctuary. And when he was slaughtering the animal and sprinkling the blood of the red heifer. So it was on Mount of Olives, but you had to see the temple, you had to see the city. And with the priest, the Kohen, who brought the red heifer and slaughtered it and burned it, he immediately became impure. You had to bring another Kohen, another priest who is pure, to take the red heifer and the ash and bring it to the city. And then he would become impure. So all this place of purification, that when you burn it, you become impure. It's all talks about being liminal, about a ritual that is between the city and outside the city, between purification and impurification. It's all connected to Mount of Olives. And actually, scholars try to identify the location where they were supposed to burn the red heifer, and they located it exactly in the spot where the Franciscan located the Church of Dominus Flevit, which we're going to visit very soon, from where Jesus was looking toward Jerusalem and he wept. And the last thing I want to present before we get into Palm Sunday and before we starting our tour is the prophecy of the book of Zechariah. In book of Zechariah prophecy, there's a prophecy of salvation that at the end of times, the day of the Lord is coming. Jerusalem would be captured by different people. I will gather all nations to Jerusalem to fight against it. The city will be captured, the houses ransacked, the women raped, half of the people will go to the exile, rest would stay. And the prophecy is a prophecy of hope. It's a prophecy of salvation. Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations. And he fights on a day, as he fought on a day, fights on a day of a battle. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem. This is the only place in the Torah, in the Old Testament, in the Jewish scriptures, where the name Mount of Olives appears. It's the only place. And it appears in the context of salvation, of prophecy of future salvation. So God will stand on Mount of Olives. That will be connected in a minute to the day you're celebrating today. And then the Lord will be king over the whole earth. And on the day, there will be one Lord, and his name will be the only name. And it will be inhabited never again, will be destroyed. Jerusalem will be secure. So this prophecy of hope of salvation is connected to Mount of Olives. God would come, God would stand on Mount of Olives, and that would mark the beginning of the salvation of the city and its people. And now, having that in the background, thinking about the place of Mount of Olives as a liminal place between the desert and the city, as a place between purification and impurification, as a place between where God's presence stands while he is rescuing the city, we can move to talk about the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. And the mosaic you see here is from the Church of Nativity. It's from the 12th century. It was lately renovated. And when you'll be able to come to the Holy Land, you're welcome to see them decorating the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. So the Palm Sunday procession, maybe I will stop here for a second if there are any questions before I continue and move to Palm Sunday, or everything is good?
I haven't received any yet.
Okay, great. So we can continue.
But a good reminder for everybody.
Yeah, so you're welcome to ask. Okay, so what is the procession? So you can see Mount of Olives, and the procession starts from the eastern slopes of Mount of Olives. It starts from Bethphage, goes to Eleona, Dominus Flevit, the Garden of Gethsemane, and then ends in the Basilica of St. Anne. That's the procession is going on right now. I guess they're somewhere around here now. And that's the procession we're going to take today in our tour. We'll start with Bethphage, which is a small church built by the Franciscans in the middle of the 20th century, but actually sits on earlier churches. It's on the slopes of Mount of Olives. You can see the desert already a few hundred of meters beyond the neighborhood. This is beyond that, there's a big neighborhood that was built by the custody, by the Franciscan for the local population, which is an important part of the role of the Franciscan in the Holy Land, not just to protect the holy places, but also to take care of the living stones. So they care of the church here in the center, but they also care about the people. So just behind Bethphage is a big Christian neighborhood built by the Franciscan, but it's just behind the church that they built. And Bethphage, the church was built over the site where the village Bethphage was used to be, and that's where Jesus asked his disciple to go and get the colt and get the donkey on which he's going to ride into the city. The church was built in the middle of the 20th century, as I said, decorated with painting that remind us the triumphal entry of Jesus to Jerusalem. But there's an interesting stone on the left, surrounded with a fence. And now we can look at this stone. This stone dates back to the 12th century. There was a church there already in the 12th century, built by the Crusaders. And not much was left from that church, but this stone with some paintings. It's quite rare to find paintings from the 12th century in the Holy Land, but they exist. And here you can see it's only one side of the stone, but here you can see the Palm Sunday procession of people receiving Jesus on Sunday. We think that this stone was used for the bishop to climb up on the donkey on which he was riding to Jerusalem, because the procession that's taking place right now in Jerusalem is a very old tradition. We're going to read a text about it very soon. So the procession starts with a blessing of the olive branches or the palm leaves. Most people would have palm leaves, and but some would also have olive branches. And the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Archbishop of Jerusalem, Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzabella here, blesses the branches. And then the procession starts, led by the Bishop of Jerusalem, the Patriarch, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, and the head of the Franciscan, the head of the custody of the Holy Land, the Custos, who's leading the Franciscan in the Holy Land. Representative here in the back, you see representative of the Order of the Holy Sepulchre, and a priest, seminarians, scouts from all over. You're going to meet later on, I think on Thursday, Father David Neuhaus, who is also present here. And that's how it looks, very, very crowded. This year, of course, there are very few people. There are no tourists, no pilgrims, just some locals. But usually it's a very, very crowded procession. And people come from all over the world. And I also took some photos from the past. And I think they're from the 70s of sisters and members of the community walking with the palm leaves on Mount of Olives. And just to get into the atmosphere, so a short video that describe the procession. This morning, can you hear it? Is it okay? Just let me know. So in the morning, they started the day at 8 o'clock with a procession in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And that took place this morning. And then I'm just jumping to the afternoon, and you can experience a bit of the procession. And also listen to the different languages. This is going to make you a lot of fun. So I hope it gave you some impression of how colorful and how happy and how festive the atmosphere is. And I think what amazes me every time I watch it is how multicultural and multilingual this experience is. People from all over the world in different languages, Arabic, Italian, Spanish, English, and they're all celebrating together. There's a very feast and very happy atmosphere comparing to the atmosphere you will find in the city later on this week. This procession is not a new thing. We have a description of this procession already in the 4th century by Igeria, a woman who was here in the 80s of the 4th century. So 382 to 384. She came here as a pilgrim. For 3 years, she wandered around the Holy Land by herself as a woman, not quite an exception. And what's amazing about her is that she wrote not only about the places she had visited, but she also writes about the liturgical year in Jerusalem. And it's one of the most important sources we have about the liturgical life in Jerusalem in the 4th century, because we have prayer books, we have calendars, we have description of the sites, but we don't have description of what's actually going on. An eyewitness who tells us what's going on. And Igeria does it. And she described the Palm Sunday procession. And I love this description because I can read it and I can look at what's happening right now on Mount of Olives. It's actually the same thing, except for the fact that they didn't start the procession in Betfage, but they started in the second station of the procession, which we are going to visit in a second, in the Church of Eleona. So according to the 7th hour, all people go out to Mount of Olives, that is to Eleona, and the bishop with them, and they all get there and they sing. I'm not reading the whole thing. You will get the presentation, so you will have the full text and you can read it again later on. So they all approach, they sing the hymns and the antiphons that's relevant to the day, which is very important. And then on the 11th hour, they read the passage of the gospel is read, where the children carrying branches of palms met the Lord, saying, "Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." And the bishop immediately rises, and all the people with him, and they all go on foot from the top of Mount to the top of Mount of Olives. All the people going before him with hymns and antiphons, answering one another, "Blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord." And then all the children in the neighborhood, even those who are too young to walk, are carried by their parents on their shoulders, exactly what you can see these days in Jerusalem. All of them bearing branches, some of palms, some of olives. Again, exactly what you can see today. And this is a description of the 4th century. And thus the bishop is escorted in the same manner as the Lord was of old. And for all, even those of rank, both matrons and men, accompany the bishop all the way on foot in this manner, making these responses from the top of Mount to the city. Then through the whole city to the Anastasis. Anastasis is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, going very slowly, lest the people should be weary, and they arrived at the Anastasis at the late hour. So it's exactly the same procession that they do today. Actually, the procession was done also during the Byzantine time, and until the Crusader time, we know that the procession was done by the Christians. After the Crusader time, so from the 12th century, it was not done so with a lot of people, but it was more modest procession that was done by the Franciscans from the 14th century. And then it was revived in the 20th century when Christians were allowed again to do big processions in the city. So from 1933, they kind of repeat this tradition of doing the same procession. So the same procession from the 4th century is being done since 1933 in Jerusalem. I would like to mention, before we continue in the procession, that the Greek Orthodox also have a procession. They also start in the church of Betfage, but they have a different church, not far from the Catholic Church of Betfage. This is the Orthodox Church of Betfage. It's important to remember that in the Holy Land, not everyone is Western Christians, Catholic or Protestants, but of course, majority of the Christians here belong to the Eastern churches in the Middle East. So the Greek Orthodox procession actually takes place on Saturday. They start a procession in Betfage on Saturday afternoon. It's not happening. It didn't happen yesterday. They do not celebrate Palm Sunday today because they follow the Julian calendar, which is 13 days behind the Gregorian calendar, and therefore Easter is calculated in a different way. And their Easter would be this year on the 2nd of May. So they will have, toward the end of April, they will have Palm Sunday. But then when they will have it, they will celebrate it from the church in Betfage. They will bless the palm leaves, and they will have procession similar to the one you saw that the Catholic do, but on Saturday afternoon. So these are photos from the Orthodox procession. And then on Palm Sunday morning, they will have a service in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, as the Franciscan had this morning. So this is the patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church. And that's how the procession in the church looks like. And it's important to remember that this is not just a holiday or feast for the clergy, but it's a feast for the local families. So local families also come to celebrate. And I think my favorite photo from this last year, when we live in a pandemic situation with the COVID, is the photo to the left from Studio Sami of a local Palestinian Christian who came to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on Palm Sunday last year, and the doors were closed because it was really on the peak of the pandemic and everything was closed and all the celebration was celebrated only with 10 people from the specific churches. So people could not come and celebrate Palm Sunday in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And he came with his little palm leaf in the shape of a cross, and he put him on the closed door of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And I think this is the most symbolic photo that tells us the story of Jerusalem during pandemic. I also would like to remember the people who live in places like Gaza, the Christian of Gaza, about 1,150 Christian living in the Gaza Strip. Most of them belong to the Orthodox Church. They also celebrate Palm Sunday. So Palm Sunday is not just a feast for Jerusalemites or people who can get to Jerusalem and celebrate with the Franciscan and the bishops or with the Patriarchate, but it's also the celebration of the communities and the parishes, also in places where they're now struggling to survive, as in Gaza. Going back to our procession. So we started from Bet Faj, we climbed up to the Church of the Eleona, and we will have a quick visit to the Church of the Eleona. Church of Eleona is one of the oldest churches in Jerusalem. It's actually one of the first 3 churches that were established by the mother of the Emperor Constantine, St. Helen. She visited Jerusalem in 326, so only 13 years after Christianity became a legal religion. And according to the biography of her son, Constantine, it says that she established a church on the Mount of Olives in the memory of the ascent to heaven of the Savior, but also she built a church. But indeed, authentic history informs us that this is the very cave that the Savior imparted his secret revelations to his disciples. It's interesting because the location of the ascension of Jesus was moved from this location to another site, which we are going to visit together later on this month. Around the day of Ascension, I will have another lecture and I will talk about the place of Ascension and how it was moved from the Eleona Church to another site. But it is memorized as the cave where Jesus talked with his disciple about the end of the times, and they asked him what would be the signs of your parouchia, of your coming back. And he explained to him, he talked about the war and the earthquake and the challenges and the fact that you will be persecuted and that would things that would come before the end of times. And this cave was identified by St. Helen as the site where Jesus taught his disciple on the Mount of Olives. Over that cave, a big compound was built. This is the modern church of Eleona. Later on in the Middle Ages, another teaching was introduced into that church, the place where Jesus taught his disciple how to pray. So the church is also called the Pater Noster, the place where the cave where Jesus taught his disciple how to pray the Lord's Prayer. And we have here the cave, so it's preserved and reconstructed. And then we have a church that was built in the 19th century by a woman from France, Orly de Bussy, a princess from France. And she invited the Carmelite sisters to live there. And so they're still running the place. And there's a modern church. Since the compound belonged to the French Republic, they tried to reconstruct the Byzantine church, but they stopped in the middle. So you see the reconstruction of the modern church. But what I love about this church is not the cave and not the building, but the walls, because on the walls the Carmelites put plate with tiles with the Lord's prayers in over 170 languages, and you can go from one plate to the other and see the same prayer in different languages. And the groups come there and they look and they stand in front of the tiles where they have a prayer in their language, and they can read it in their mother tongue, and they see themselves present in this church. And I always recommend the visitors to look around, not just to look at the tiles with the prayers in your language, but to look around you and to see the other languages, because the other languages indicate that there are people coming here from all over the world. So the gospel started from Jerusalem. The disciples started to spread the gospel and to bring the good news from Jerusalem, but they went all over the world. And now people from all over the world come back to Jerusalem to be here together. And that's also the story of the Holy Week and Palm Sunday, being together. So here you have it in Greek, and you also have the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic and Hebrew. Probably Jesus taught his disciple the prayer in one of these languages, either in Hebrew or in Aramaic. So you can also read it in both languages, Hebrew and Aramaic. And that's the tomb of Aurélie de Bussy, who actually purchased the place and built the church in the 19th century. And her body was brought to be buried here in the church in Jerusalem. Okay, we continue in our procession. We're going down the hill with a lot of people with their palm leaves. And we will go down from here toward the bottom of Mount of Olives. But before doing that, we will take a look at the Jewish cemetery. All the slopes of Mount of Olives from the southern side are covered with a big Jewish cemetery. As I said, Jews do not bury inside the city. And since the mountain, the ridge was the border of the city, so it was covered with tombstones. So it's a very old cemetery being used by the Jewish communities for centuries and still being used. We have another cemetery because this one is quite full, but it's an interesting cemetery because it's a very traditional one. You will not see people putting flowers on the tombstones, but only stones. And you have a lot of famous people buried, obviously, in this cemetery, people who died in the last 500 years in Jerusalem. We will see the view of the city and the view of the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa. And if we look to the south, we will see another peak of Mount of Olives. As I said, it's a ridge, so it has few peaks. And that's Mount Corruption, or Hill of Corruption. In Hebrew, it's called Har HaMashchit. Har HaMashchit is a very similar word to the word Mishcha. Mishcha is oil. So Hill of Corruption and Hill of Oil is very similar in Hebrew. It's mentioned in the book of Kings when King Uzziah was cleaning the places of idolatry. And the king also desecrated the high places that were east of Jerusalem and south of the Hill of Corruption, the one Solomon, king of Israel, had built for Ashtoreth, the vile goddess of the Sidonian, for Chomesh, and for the vile god of Moab, and for Molech, the detestable god of the people of Ammon. And King Solomon had many foreign women, and they had their own little altars, and Uzziah destroyed all these altars. And that's why the name of the hill is Hill of Corruption. And that's, again, another biblical name for Mount of Olives. In the Jewish tradition, they changed the name and they started to call Mount of Olives Mount of Oil. So in Hebrew, these names are very similar. Corruption, Mashchit, Oil, Mishcha. It's very similar name. So Mount Corruption, now there's a center of the Catholic Caritas France. It's a guest house called Maison Avraham. We will continue from here to the tombs of prophets Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Now, these are not really the tombs of the prophets, but this is a very old burial site from the Byzantine time. It's on the slopes of Mount of Olives. This is the plan of the tomb. It's very special because it has tunnels and little niches. And sometimes around the 14th century, Jews and Christians started to write about this place as the tomb of the prophets. And it's interesting because it's also connected to the story of the triumphal entry of Jesus to Jerusalem, because the entry to Jerusalem is the beginning of salvation. It's the first moment of the beginning, first step towards salvation. And the book of Malachi is the book that ends the Old Testament and actually opens the New Testament, because in the book of Malachi it ends with a prophecy about the messenger that would come toward the end of times. This is a cave from inside, and in the book of Malachi, to the end, the last verses in the book of Malachi or this. So it starts with, I will send you my messenger who will prepare the way before me. Then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant whom you desire will come, says the Lord Almighty. And then it ends with, see, I will send you the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the hearts of the children to the parents, or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction. So Malachi talks about Elijah as the messenger, as the one who comes before the great and dreadful day. And in the New Testament, the connection to John the Baptist is very, very clear. So Malachi talks about the end of day and about what will come before the end of days, and then it's being fulfilled with Jesus coming down from the same place, passing now with the procession today near the tomb of Malachi. I would like to mention that in the Jewish tradition, we also believe that the salvation should come during the month of the spring, during the month of Nisan. And in the Shabbat, the Saturday before the feast of Passover, that means 2 days ago, we read this paragraph from the book of Malachi. So it's a lot about being saved and salvation during this time of the year. And therefore, Malachi and his prophecy is very much relevant to this time of the year and to this procession. We continue to Dominus Flevit. I maybe stop here for a second to see if there are any questions or something.
Yeah. So we've got two questions. The first question is regarding the procession. So the question is, how long does this procession take? And under normal circumstances, so outside COVID, do we need to be part of a tour, or can anybody join?
So yes, it's usually takes about an hour and a half till they get to St. Anne. And then there's a procession that goes back to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that takes another half an hour, and everyone is welcome to join. Yes. And that's what's wonderful about all the services and the prayers during the Holy Week. Everyone is welcome to join, and people join from all over the world, because there are tourists and visitors from all over the world. The only problem is that the city is not prepared for so many people. And today the police is always a bit terrified that too many people would come and it would be overcrowded and it would be risky. So they try to limit and put some fences, and there's a lot of security, and they try to slow down some of the people who walk in the procession so it wouldn't be overcrowded. There's some parts that are you have to go through really narrow streets, and when you have tens of thousands of people, it could be dangerous. So sometimes it can be frustrating because you try to get to the procession, and then the police stop you and say, no, it's overcrowded now and you have to wait. Especially when you have services inside the old city, then the number of people is limited, and then you sometimes find yourself a bit far from the real thing. But yes, everyone is welcome to join.
And then regarding the graveyards that we saw for the Jewish people, are the Jewish people buried, or are they also cremated?
No, we don't have cremation in Judaism. In the Jewish tradition, it's not allowed to do cremation. We have some secular cremation, so if people insist, but it's still very uncommon in Jewish tradition and for Jews in Israel to be cremated, although it's now a possibility. But traditionally, we're all being buried inside the ground. So your body should lie on the soil. So even if you see a tombstone or something that looks maybe like sarcophagus, you will not find the body inside. It's always inside the ground. So so we have lack of place in Jerusalem. It's a big problem now because the city is too big, and a lot of people need to be buried here. So yeah, it's a problem also.
And then one more question.
Yeah.
One more question was to the earlier statement about the purity. To what extent are the rules around purity or impurity operative in Judaism today? And does part of the city close for the procession, and for how long? I think we've answered that.
Okay, we answered that. So yeah, the purity, since purity and impurity are relevant for the temple, and we don't have a temple since the year 70 or 2000 years, so they're not so relevant anymore. We have traditional things that we do in the memory of this impurity. For example, people who come from the family of Kohanim, priests, would not enter a cemetery. But it's not relevant because there's no temple, so they don't have a job in the temple anymore. So, I mean, it doesn't matter that they go or don't go to the temple. But but it doesn't have any practical implementation today. There's some other purification rituals that we still have to do today, like women after the period, like someone who wants to convert. So we have something of that. There's also spiritual purification. So people go to the ritual bath just to purify their heart, but it doesn't have any practical implementation. It's just spiritual experience. In the time of the temple, in the Bible, it's a very practical thing. If you don't go to the ritual bath, you are impure, you cannot enter the temple. Nothing to do with what you feel, it's about your body. It's a very technical thing that you had to do. But we don't have that because we don't have a temple anymore. Okay, so I will continue with Dominus Flevit, which is in the middle of the slopes of the hill. This is the church. It was built about 70 years ago, and it looks like a teardrop, because when Jesus comes to Jerusalem and he about to enter Jerusalem, he looks at the city, and instead of being very happy, and everyone around him is very happy, he wept over the city. He was crying. He was talking about its destruction. And he tells Jerusalem, and that's something that you can see that in the design, in the modern design of the church facing the old city. I just want to jump. Okay. The church facing the old city, and on the altar you have a little mosaic of a little hand with his cheeks, and a quote from Matthew 23. Jesus stood in front of Jerusalem and said, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who killed the prophets and stoned those who sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house left to desolate." And this, his prophecy about the destruction, about how many times Jerusalem didn't listen to the people that were sent to her, it's very painful for him. So he goes down the hill and he cries. While again, think about all the others around him. They're all singing and they're very happy, and he cries. And the church is designed in a way that it's facing west. It's facing the old city. So when the priest serves on the altar, he sees the old city. He sees Jerusalem. Actually, there is an old altar there because the new church was built over a Byzantine church, where you can see it's still the place of the old altar. And this is another thing of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. You always have the dialogue with the past. So even if you build a new church facing to the west, facing to Jerusalem, talking about how Jesus wept when he saw Jerusalem, talking about its destruction, it's also a dialogue with the church that was there in the past, that was not facing west, but facing east, like all the Byzantine churches. And you can still see the old place of the altar that is not in use anymore. So in that church, in that place, Jesus was facing the city and crying. And the Franciscan who purchased the place in the 19th century did some archaeological excavation and found ossuaries from the Second Temple period. So they found a burial site. So again, imagine Jesus coming down from Mount of Olives, standing in this cemetery with tombstones and burial caves around him. So this was also a burial site. And he looks at the city and he wept and he cried and talked about how the city would be destroyed. And I want to talk about another person walking on the same mountain and also crying, but about 1,000 years earlier. And that's King David. King David was not a very good father. He had a son, Absalom, who searched for relationships, for connection. And when Amnon raped his sister and Absalom killed him, King David didn't do anything. And Absalom asked his father, "Please pay attention to me. I killed my brother." Nothing. And then Absalom went to his grandfather's palace and he expected his father to call him to come back, and nothing. And then Absalom came back and he hoped his father would try to have some kind of relationship with him. Nothing. And then Absalom went to the people and said, I'm going to have I'm going to be a better king than my father. I will listen to you. I will have a relationship with you. I will care about you. Follow me. And then King David noticed. And and Absalom captured his father's palace and took his wife. And then David left the palace and he went up by the ascent of Mount Olives and wept as he went up and had his head covered, and he went barefoot. And all the people that was with him, because many people followed Absalom, his son, covered every man his head, and they went up weeping, and as they went up. So Jesus comes down and he wept. King David goes up and he cries and he wept. Jesus comes down and he wept because the kingdom, the place, the city will be destroyed. King David goes up because he sees his kingdom, he sees his palace being destroyed, being taken by his son. But the story of the book of Samuel ends in a different way than the story of Jesus, or maybe in the same way. At the end, there was a war. Absalom was captured. He was killed, and King David got his kingdom back. It was a very painful moment for him. He was crying for his son, but he's got his kingdom back. His kingdom was, again, the kingdom of Jerusalem. And when Jesus cries, he cries for the kingdom that will be lost. But this kingdom will be renewed in the future. So they're both going in different directions, crying, and both kingdom will be renewed in a way. And then this year, and also last year, the procession did not end in St. Anne as it usually does, but the Franciscan preferred to conclude the procession in Dominus Flevit for technical reasons. And last year, when they concluded the procession in Dominus Flevit, the site that we are visiting now, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzaballa, had a beautiful message that he delivered over there. And you have a link here for the full message. But he was talking about how different this year is from other years. And he said, today we have not celebrated the solemn and beautiful entrance of Jesus to the city of Jerusalem like every year, with faithful from all the parishes and dioceses and with pilgrims from all over the world. We have not raised our palms and olive branches to cry out, Hosanna to our King Jesus the Christ. The streets that would have been full of people and songs, hymns, and the sounds of bagpipes on that day are empty and silent. Again, I remind you, last Easter, it was like the peak of the pandemic in Jerusalem. Everything was closed. We couldn't leave the houses for more than 100 meters. What is the Lord saying to us? Why all this? What can we do in these dramatic moments for the life of the world and ours? And he continues that the entry to Jerusalem is the discrepancy between the expectation and the reality. People are happy. Hosanna, Hosanna. They are looking forward for Jesus to come and solve all the problems. And he doesn't solve the problems. He wept. He was crying. And there's discrepancy between these two things that happen at the same time, the happiness and the sadness. And Archbishop Pier Battista said this is really how the discrepancy between our expectation and the reality, because on one hand, we want a remedy. We want right now to pray to God, and it doesn't matter if you're Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, you want to pray to God and to end this corona, to end this pandemic. But God thinks about, God's plan is bigger than our tiny little expectation. And we ask for having a better tomorrow. We want to make sure that we can leave the house tomorrow. We want to make sure that we can fly tomorrow to visit our friends. We want to make sure that we'll be able to take a vacation. But God has bigger plans for us. And when the people saw him coming and thought, okay, he's going to solve our immediate problem, he was crying because he was having a much bigger plan. And again, I think this is a message that for me as a Jew, it was very relevant last year and also this year when we think about how we tend to see the very immediate and small picture, while there's some bigger picture beyond that, beyond our small expectation as human beings. And then he says something that I think also is very, very relevant. He says the gospel are based on hope and love, but not about certainty. And we want to have certainty, but we don't have this certainty. And I think this is the most difficult things for many of us during the pandemic, is this uncertainty in our life. We will pass the Garden of Gethsemane, which we're not going to talk about today, because you will visit the Garden of Gethsemane and pray there on Thursday with Father David Neuhaus, and we will end our procession in the Old City. We will not enter through the Golden Gate, which is in Hebrew Sha'ar HaRachamim, Gate of Mercy, or Bab el-Rahma in Arabic. This gate, through which Jesus traditionally entered, is a sealed gate. It was probably a gate that was used by priests for their rituals, and it was always a closed gate. There's a whole research about when this gate was built and who closed it, but it's definitely totally sealed since the 16th century, so you cannot enter from this gate. It leads directly to the temple. So traditionally, Jesus entered the city through this gate, but we won't be able to do that. We will enter through another gate with a mixed crowd of people, local pilgrims, clergy. You see here the Palestinian flag, so these are Christians from the Holy Land, and of course the procession of the clergy, the patriarch, the head of the Franciscan, the custos, and we will enter through the Lion's Gate. Lion's Gate is a nearby gate to the eastern side of the city, with 4 lions decorating the gate, made by the Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. And with this, in this gate, right after this gate, we will enter the Basilica of St. Anne, where the procession will be concluded. So we walk through the procession. We finish about the same time when they finish the procession in Jerusalem right now. And I invite you in the few minutes that we have left, if you have questions or you want to share or any remarks, I'll be happy to hear.
Thank you very much for that. The one question we have here is the procession ending at Dominus Flevent this year? Could you just clarify where it's ending this year, please?
Yeah. So this year they said it will end it in Dominus Flevit as well. So they're not going to go all the way to St. Anne. So practically it's going to, just for practical reason. But I guess next year it will be again ending in St. Anne. So, I mean, what is missing is the entry to the city. I think the whole idea is that he entered the city and the next place he's going is the temple. When you stop in Dominus Flevit, it's kind of stopping in the middle and you don't really repeat the whole route that he did. But again, this is not a regular year. Usually, I think it's very impressive, as Guerrier described it in the 4th century. Sorry, they entered and they arrived into the city with the procession, and that's what they're going to do in the regular year.
And from a Jewish perspective, why would Jesus have chosen the donkey and not walked? And also, the donkey had not been ridden before. So, is there any specific Jewish perspectives from that perspective?
So usually sacrifices and the scapegoat and the cow, the red heifer, they all have to be animals that were not been ridden before, so they didn't carry any yoke and they're undamaged. And yes, so the donkey is from the book of Zechariah. I think that's the first slide in the presentation. I think they put a quote. Let me go back to the first, just to go back and show that. So I think that, so it's that the Savior, the Messiah, in the Bible, we don't have the word Messiah in the Old Testament, but the one who, excuse me, I'll do it in a very not elegant way. It's not an elegant way to do it, but Yeah, here it is. No, I took the quote instead from Zechariah. It's the quote from Matthew quoting the book of Zechariah, that the Messiah would come riding on a your king will come gentle and riding on a donkey. So it's a prophecy from Zechariah quoted in Matthew, talking about this savior, whatever it means in Judaism, who would enter on a donkey. So in order to fulfill this prophecy, it was important for the writer of the gospel to mention that and to quote, and Matthew quote Zechariah.
And through which gate did Jesus enter Jerusalem?
This is a good question, because traditionally it's the Golden Gate, which is the sealed gate. Now, historically, there's a problem because if there was a gate there, and probably there was a gate there, it was used only for the rituals of the priests, of the Kohanim in the temple. I remind you two rituals I've mentioned in the beginning of my presentation. The first was the red heifer, and the second is the scapegoat. So this was a gate facing Mount of Olives, and if it was a gate for the rituals, it makes sense that pilgrims did not enter through that gate. And of course, it's important to remember Jesus was not a Kohen. He was not a priest. He was a Pharisee. He was not serving in the temple. He was mixed family, but from his father family, he belongs to the Israelites, the Pharisees. So he was not entering from that gate. But the building, the structure I've presented in the presentation is not earlier than the 7th century. So there's a dispute between scholars if it's from the mid-7th century, if it's Heraclius or it's the Muslim who built it. But it was never a useful gate because this gate leads directly to the Temple Mount and not to the city. And it's not secure to have a gate from outside, from the desert, going directly to the holy place. Usually you will enter the city and then you will enter from the city to the Temple Mount. So this gate, maybe it was built for processional purposes in the late Christian and Muslim tradition. And that raises the question, so through which gate Jesus historically could enter? Maybe there was another gate to the southern part of the wall. Maybe he entered through other gates. So sometimes the tradition and what we know from historical texts or from other texts from other traditions, this match and don't really match. And scholars trying to answer in different ways of what actually was the route that he did. But he came from the east, and this is very important to the story, and therefore the entry through an eastern gate was very important to the Christian tradition to connect it to this Golden Gate.
Thank you. I'm just conscious our time's unfortunately up, and I know some people joined, I think, a bit later because of this time difference issue. We've all moved clocks this weekend, so I think we're a bit confused there. But I just want to say thank you, Hannah. But there's one last statement that somebody has shared, which I'd like to just share with everybody. She says, I'm struck by the links between David crying for his broken relationship, Jesus crying for the broken relationships between people and God. And now in this pandemic, we cry for a broken relationship with God's creation. So,
it's very nice.
Very, very good. So I think we've unfortunately now come to the end of our session for today. I don't know if Stephen can share with us some information hot off the press. So these are the photos coming in where Father John Paul and Deacon Frederick are praying and walking Palm Sunday, which Hava's just shown us the beautiful Mount Olives. So they're walking there and praying for each one of us. And as you can see, they're all wearing masks. The two gents in the middle just pulled it off for the photo because they didn't want us to see them with their masks on. You can see they're wearing them around their necks.
But it seemed quite crowded, so it's nice.
Yeah. And Hannah, you also mentioned that we can and we will put the link on the IC Geneva, so everybody can actually go and watch the procession right now as well, if they want to continue with that as well.
And it's also available on Facebook, so you can watch it later on as well. All the procession services.
So Hannah, I just want to say thank you very much for a wonderful session filled with an immense wealth of rich information. And your energy and passion, both for the topic of Jerusalem, the Palm Sunday, and for the people is so clearly visible. And I know makes many of us long to be back in Jerusalem. So thank you very much for enriching us both spiritually and mentally. And what a wonderful way for us to start our Holy Week. And so I just want to say to everybody, thank you very much for joining. And please join us again tomorrow, where we will learn and see and experience the Orthodox tradition of the service of the bridegroom. And this is a service wonderfully rich in meaning and clearly with the focus on the bridegroom. So with that, I wish you all a good Palm Sunday. And thank you very much for joining. And hopefully see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.